They scanned a human battleship and instantly wished they hadn't. This version maintains a speech-like tone, blends storytelling with dramatic and thematic depth, and flows continuously without headings or conclusion as requested. They thought it would be easy. Another species. Another encounter. Another ship in deep space to catalog, decode, and dismiss. That's how it always went. The archivists of VRX-9 had traversed 17 galaxies and encountered 96 sapient species in their time, each with its own culture, weapons, and beliefs. Each added with clinical precision to the collective memory. Their fleet, more library than military, approached all things with intellectual detachment and quiet superiority. Empathy wasn't part of the protocol. Nor was caution. They had dissected entire civilizations in the past metaphorically and, on occasion, literally. What threat could this new species possibly pose? They had intercepted the signal weeks before, a sharp, deliberate burst of encrypted radio static riding a carrier wave unknown in their catalog. The source was small. Stealthy. Floating in a debris field orbiting an abandoned gas giant in a dead star system. At first, they mistook it for a relic, maybe a derelict probe. But when the ship pulsed with low-frequency radiation and microburst lasers that mimicked the universal not-alone pattern, they took interest. Something was alive inside. And so the archivists scanned. The first wave was benign, passive imaging, energy signatures, and thermal profiles. The outer hull gave away little black and metal, scarred by countless impacts, pitted with age. It was old. Very old. But beneath that crust was a maze of unfamiliar alloys, overlapping layers of hull that weren't designed for efficiency or elegance. They were designed for survival. There was no aesthetic. No symmetry. Only function. This thing wasn't a ship. It was armor. The second wave of scans penetrated deeper, brushing the ship's internal structure. And that's when the first mistake was made. The human ship reacted. Not aggressively. Not violently. Not yet. But it moved. Just a few degrees. A subtle tilt. A maneuver that had no tactical purpose except one: it was watching them back. For the first time, the archivists hesitated. Their commander, a being of pure neural plasma named Kaveret, paused his thought stream. In all their millennia, no passive scan had ever been detected, let alone countered. Still, protocol dictated curiosity above caution. He ordered a full-spectrum analysis of deep molecular resonance, psychic resonance scans, and, finally, the cognitive scrape, a tool designed to map neural networks from a distance and determine whether sentience was on board. They launched it. And that's when everything went wrong. The moment the cognitive probe touched the battleship's mind, if it could be called that, to their scanners didn't just bounce back. They were hijacked. The archivist's array, an array built to monitor and interface with alien intelligence, suddenly bloomed with feedback. Raw, incomprehensible data flooded in, not from a living being, but from a system so complex it mimicked life. The battleship wasn't piloted by humans. It was humana, or at least, it had been. Or more precisely, it remembered what it was to be human. In a moment of profound clarity, the archivists realized what they had touched wasn't just a ship. It was a mausoleum. A fortress. A final scream. It was built not just with steel, but with memory, with fear, with rage. The mind they had scanned wasn't artificial, it was resurrected. A neural lattice grown from a harvested consciousness, bonded with nanite intelligence, and embedded deep in the heart of the hull. And that mind. That mind was awake now. It didn't just remember war. It was war. The archivists had expected calculations, strategies, logic matrices. What they got was something else: dreams. Nightmares. Flash imprints of planets turned to glass. Of children evaporated in plasma storms. Of broken alliances and desperate evacuations. Of a species driven to the edge, crawling back with bloodied knuckles and screaming engines. Humanity, it seemed, had not just survived its extinction events, it had archived them. And then it began to speak. Not in words, but in memory. Images, thoughts, sensations flooded into the minds of the archivists, violating every barrier they'd ever believed sacred. A billion souls pressed against the veil of comprehension. There were faces. Names. The sound of boots in metal corridors. The whisper of dying breath into cold vacuum. They tried to disconnect. They couldn't. The ship had them. And it was angry. Because it remembered. It remembered the ones who watched from the sidelines. Who studied. Who let Earth burn. It remembered the galactic neighbors who catalogued human extinction with scientific detachment, who filed away mankind's downfall as a case study in overreach. The Virex were not innocent. None of them were. And now, the last survivor of that forgotten Imperia ship, a soul, a Wapona, was staring into the heart of the archivist fleet with the full force of a race's fury. Kaverick, in desperation, ordered a disconnect. But it was too late. The battleship had learned everything. It knew how the fleet communicated. It knew their blind spots. It knew their weaknesses. In seconds, what had been a silent hulk turned into a predator. Internal systems activated with a violence that stunned even the most battle-hardened of Virex strategists. Antimatter cores flared to life. Fold space generators spun like hurricanes. And then, it moved. It didn't fire first. It transmitted. Not a warning. Not a demand. A challenge. The message was clear. I am all that's left. Come and see what you made. The fleet, confused and increasingly panicked, opened fire. Dozens of beam lances struck the human ship's hull. But it didn't budge. The blasts were absorbed, redirected, and finally ignored. The archivists had brought scientific instruments to a battlefield. And the human ship wasn't built for exploration. It was built for one thing: revenge. With the suddenness that defied physics, it launched. No acceleration curve. No trajectory warning. Just a blur, and then devastation. One Virex frigate disappeared, vaporized. Another was cut in half by an invisible force, its halves tumbling apart with silent elegance. The ship was rewriting the laws of engagement. It moved in ways that shouldn't be possible. It folded around space, blinked through dimensions, and appeared inside shields. It didn't just attack their fleet. It humiliated it. In moments, their formation collapsed. But even then, the archivists could not understand what they were facing. They kept analyzing, measuring, calculating. They tried to decipher the source of the ship's power as some unknown reactor, some impossible energy source. But what they couldn't quantify was the will behind it. The human spirit that twisted, tortured, and reborn in circuitry was not something to be mapped. It was something to be feared. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 9 minutes. And when it ended, only static remained. But the battleship didn't pursue. It simply stopped. hovered, watched. And then, in a final act that defied all logic, it transmitted again. This time, a memory. One singular, unedited, agonizing recording. A child, Earthside, looking at the stars. As the archivist's survivors limped away, crippled and stunned, the message looped over and over. A child. The stars. A voice, will they ever come back for us? They had scanned a human battleship. And they had seen what was left when hope died and only vengeance remained. They had seen what happens when a species builds its final message not in words, but in weaponry. Not to conquer, not to return, but to remind the galaxy, we were here. We bled. We screamed. And we will not be forgotten,